All right, so my presentation today is going to focus on the Friends of Everbloom partnership that's part of the Friends of Reservoirs. This partnership works on two different lakes in central Illinois, and that's where the name comes from. They work on Evergreen Lake and Lake Bloomington. I think one thing that might not get really pushed home in my presentation, but that's why I put this up here, is people coming together to make a difference. I think we've already heard that this morning, that it really takes a wide variety of different people coming together to make a difference on our lakes. And I'll talk about this a little bit through my presentation, but it's not really the main focus, but I think it's extremely important when you look at fish management, watershed projects, that sort of thing. It takes a diverse group of people coming together to really solve those issues. Where these lakes are at are in somewhat central Illinois. Anything south of Chicago we call downstate, so we're in downstate Illinois, which I think is a good thing for me. We'll zoom in a little bit. The two lakes, Evergreen Lake and Lake Bloomington, are water supply lakes for the city of Bloomington. They lie about 20 miles roughly north of the city of Bloomington. There's a sister city to Bloomington called Normal. It gets all its drinking water from the Muhammad Aquifer, so it's pumping wells. But the city of Bloomington gets all of its drinking water from those two lakes. And it's actually a blessing for the city that they have two different lakes, because there's water quality issues and they can pump water from one lake or the other depending on which has the better water quality at the time. I'm going to start off, concentrate on each lake on its own, kind of give you a general idea of what the lakes look like or their characteristics and what issues we face on each lake, and then kind of touch on some projects that we're doing, have done in the past, and what we're doing right now. So Evergreen Lake was constructed in 1971 as a water supply for the city of Bloomington. It was actually the second lake. Lake Bloomington was constructed much earlier than that. In 95, they increased the pool elevation 5 feet, basically because there wasn't enough water supply for the city, so they needed more water capacity. So instead of dredging, they just raised the dam 5 feet. Now it has a surface acre of roughly 900 acres. Not a huge reservoir compared to Texas standards, but decent size for central Illinois. One of the major issues that we face, row crops cover 87% of the watershed. These two lakes are in McLean County. McLean County is usually 1 or 2 in corn and soybean production in the state of Illinois. So we have a lot of farm fields out there. It is an impaired water body for phosphorus and total suspended solids. The total allowable load of phosphorus is 4,900 pounds per year. That means we have to reduce our load by 85%. That's how much extra phosphorus we're having input in our lake. So that's a major task for us, is trying to figure out how do you reduce phosphorus loading by 85%. One of the benefits that we have is that we went in and developed a watershed plan, which really helps us address some of these issues. We have something sitting on the shelf that we pull off and actually use, which is a lot different than a lot of other lakes that I work on. We write watershed plans and they just tend to collect dust. On Evergreen Lake, we actually put those to use. I hired an engineer to go survey our lake and feeder streams, which has been very important to us. We found out that shoreline erosion within the lake contributes an estimated 300 tons of sediment per year. Stream bank erosion within 4 miles of the lake contributes over 2,100 tons of sediment per year. To me, those are pretty large numbers. Those are tons every year adding to our lakes. So we started an active watershed committee to write these plans. I would say a few years after we wrote that watershed plan, that committee kind of went silent for a while, but now we're active again. And so about every quarter we come together to basically keep that plan working, updated as needed. So since I'm a fish biologist, I care about the fish. So what kind of issues do we have on Evergreen Lake? Major sport fish in Illinois, just like Texas, is largemouth bass. Evergreen Lake used to have a common name. It's called Evercarp Lake. It didn't have a real good sport fish population in it. So there was, back in the early 90s, there was a push to really increase the largemouth bass population on the lake. And if you can look at the early 90s on that chart, about 1998 there was an increase in the bass catch rates, and then it started to decline, and it kind of stayed stable. And about 2009, you can see this huge difference in our bass population there. Well, in the early 90s, we pushed bass stockings to see if that would bolster the bass population in the lake. These were all decent-sized fingerling stockings. They were marked. The majority of the fish were marked, mainly with a fin clip. Some were freeze branded. So we knew what the contribution of these fish was going to be into the fishery when we did our fish surveys. I don't want to deal a whole lot with this, but if you can look where our stocking was at from 1990 to 2006, go back to here, and you can see that blip in 98. Part of that was because the lake was lowered 5 feet, flooded a bunch of terrestrial vegetation, and then we had a big production of largemouth bass that year. But the largemouth bass stockings really weren't changing our catch rates in that lake. But it was being promoted pretty heavily with the local bass club and to anglers that, we could stock our way out of this issue. I started in the fall of '99, so my first year there really was in 2000. Unfortunately, you can see I was on a decline when I started. So here comes the new young guy in, and the bass population's tanking back out again. So they're like, let's get the old guy back, and because he fixed the problem. So after a couple years, I realized this bass stocking wasn't working. So my first hurdle was trying to get the local bass club to buy in that we needed to focus on habitat, because they were buying the fish. It wasn't Illinois DNR that was doing this bass stocking. It was the local bass club buying all those fish. And it was a major expense for them to stock these fish. But I went down the road trying to convince them, let's stop the bass stocking, let's take that money and your effort, and let's put it into habitat. And I can tell you I wasn't the most popular biologist promoting that. But if you can read this, we actually stopped that stocking in '06. And then we initiated an aquatic vegetation project. I didn't know how to do one. By the seat of my pants, I was like reading stuff. I went down to Missouri, met with a gentleman down in Cape Girardeau, and he kind of showed me how they raise their plants, how they protect them, got all their information from the Corps on how they do it. So that's what we did. We actually grew our plants in-lake. We had an in-lake nursery, growing them in little swimming pools in pots, protected those, and then we started planting vegetation. Then Mother Nature did us a huge favor in 2008, had a major carp die-off on that lake. Evercarp Lake, like I told you before, our catch rates for carp were really high. So those carp died off. If you can read the chart down at the bottom, in '08, we actually, when those carp died off, the vegetation from our project of planting, that vegetation took off across the lake almost immediately. It was amazing how fast that vegetation spread. And in '08, the blue at the bottom is the young of the year, the 0 to 6 inch fish. And these are fall survey information. Even in '08, right after those carp died off and that vegetation just started to grow, we still had enough vegetation where we got, good young of the year production that year. But then the following 2 years, it was dramatic how much bass production we had in that lake. All from the vegetation. That's the only thing that changed on that lake was the increase in vegetation around the lake. One thing I failed to mention before, another thing about Evergreen Lake, is we had a muskie stocking project. And if any of you have muskie, bass anglers hate muskie. And so the decline of that bass population, all the bass guys thought that the muskie were eating all of our largemouth bass. So that was another hurdle in Illinois that we had to deal with, was that we had to convince them that the muskie were not eating all of our largemouth bass. That had nothing to do with it. But now I can convince them that, because now we have more bass in the lake, and we still have a great muskie fishery. But now the sister lake, Lake Bloomington, we have hybrid striped bass in that lake, and so now we're convinced all the hybrid stripers are eating our largemouth bass. But vegetation works. I just want to throw this up here. It does work. We were lucky enough to get carp die-off to help us out a little bit. Vegetation establishment can be a really slow process, but I think the benefits are well worth it. And Evergreen Lake, I use this as a classic example when I talk to people about habitat. If it worked on this lake, it can work on other lakes. The issue that we still have, though, is we're waiting for legal bass. So, now the bass anglers or tournament guys are still waiting for those number of big fish to show up. I just did a night survey this past week, and that number is increasing, but I'm not sure it's increasing fast enough, so a regulation change also might be in order. I also do vegetation surveys. I try to do these every few years just to see how that's changing on the lake. Unfortunately, I didn't do a survey before we started the vegetation project, but I can tell you most of Evergreen Lake would have been void of vegetation, other than at the upper left-hand corner of that picture is the dam. So I would say the top maybe 10% of the lake has Eurasian water milfoil in it, and that was the only vegetation that was established in Evergreen Lake. And we're not supposed to promote exotics, but I definitely wasn't going to get rid of it either, because it was pretty good bass habitat, but we still have that. So now we're up to 7 different species on Evergreen Lake for vegetation. Unfortunately, one of those is Eurasian water milfoil, so we're going to have to address that. But almost going from no vegetation in '07, 7 years later, now we're up to 7 different types of species. The negative is if you look at the lower right-hand corners, all those red dots, that's where there is no vegetation, so that's where we're concentrating our efforts in putting vegetation in the lake now. So we actually have a vegetation project in the lake to try to establish vegetation in the upper ends of the lake. Lake Bloomington, that was constructed in 1929. That was the main water supply of the lake. That was raised 5 feet in 1957 to gain more capacity for the lake. It's approximately 600 acres. Row crops, again, 85% of the watershed. So another issue. It's also listed as an impaired water body for phosphorus, total suspended solids, and now it has the addition of nitrates, which is huge if you're a water supply lake, because the restrictions for nitrates is pretty low. So we have a mandated nitrate reduction of 48%. The main source is agricultural runoff through our field tiles. As was mentioned before, in Iowa, we get plenty of rain, and farmers want to get rid of that rainwater, so they tile the watershed to drain that away. An estimated 7,500 acres in the watershed is tiled. So we have basically a direct tube under the ground from all that runoff going straight to our feeder streams into the lake. So we promote things like buffer strips around the lakes and our streams, but the field tile runs right underneath all that, bypasses all those filters, and directly dumps into our streams and lakes. Mandated phosphorus reduction is 89%. Main sources of that is erosion, stream, bank, and in-lake erosion. Our nitrate levels exceed drinking water standards certain times of the year for Lake Bloomington, so that's the advantage of them having Evergreen. They can pump from Evergreen Lake when those nitrate levels in Bloomington rise, so that's a benefit. We also developed a watershed plan for Lake Bloomington after we got done with Evergreen. Again, we had an engineer survey the lake, shoreline, and feeder streams to figure out where our sediment and issues were coming from. We also work with NRCS to go look at the ag fields and work with those people to see what our issues are actually in the ag fields. The stream bank erosion contributes over 1,200 tons of sediment to this lake per year. And then shoreline erosion, so that's in-lake shoreline erosion, is estimated at 3,756 tons of sediment per year. So it's a combined watershed committee, so we both focus on Evergreen Lake and Lake Bloomington at the same time. It's a really good watershed committee. We get a lot of different types of user groups involved in that watershed committee. And once again, I worried about the fish, so we'll talk about largemouth bass again. Lake Bloomington's a little bit different. If you look at this graph, this is just 0 to 6 and then 6 to 8 inch largemouth bass catch rates during fall night surveys. You can see where we have big spikes in production, recruitment, certain years, and then really low events happening there. We also had a bass stocking program at the same time from 99 to 2004. This was funded by DNR. This was part of a research project where we worked with the Illinois Natural History Survey on a statewide bass stocking project to see if bass stockings would work. We stocked 2-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, stocked my boat ramp, stocked them off. Boat ramps stocked, when somebody said it wasn't working, we said, why is it not working? So we tried a variety of different ways to get this bass stocking to work. It didn't work on Lake Bloomington, so we stopped that. And as you can see, those spikes aren't due to the bass stocking, it was due to something else. And it's water level fluctuation. So both lakes, since they're water supply lakes, will get anywhere from 3 feet up to 12 feet water reductions summer through fall. So we usually have full pool about middle of summer, and then water consumption in the city goes up. Those lakes both start dropping on a steady basis. So some years we get a 12-foot drawdown, which creates an issue. The positive thing for largemouth bass is if the timing's right on the drawdown, we'll get terrestrial vegetation to grow, and in the spring when that gets flooded, that's when we get those spikes of the young of the year bass. So once again, it's due to habitat. We're flooding all that terrestrial vegetation in those flats, and then we're getting those spikes in bass production. So we do vegetation surveys on Bloomington as well. More of an issue on aquatic vegetation. We have not done an aquatic vegetation project on this lake before, and it pretty much shows the number of species. We only have 3 species in the lake. You look at the red dots, there's a lot of red dots around the lake, so there's not a lot of aquatic vegetation on this lake. Where there are colored dots besides red, most of them are 1 species, so we're not having a lot of diversity. And if we have plants there, it doesn't mean there's a lot of density either. This is just representing if the plant was actually found. In a lot of these, it would be very small amounts of vegetation. I mean, if we found one little sprig, we found that plant. I do have data to represent density, but this is just showing if we actually found vegetation. So pretty sparse. So our task was, we're going to have to put probably aquatic vegetation habitat in this lake to improve our bass population. So here's the issues that we face on these 2 lakes combined. Phosphorus is on both lakes, nitrates on Bloomington, high sediment delivery for both lakes, internal and external, low bass recruitment, mainly on Bloomington now. I think we got Evergreen pretty much covered. Low aquatic vegetation density on Bloomington, invasive and exotic aquatic plants on Evergreen. We have Asian carp below the spillways. If you've ever seen the videos of the jumping carp like on the Illinois River up by Chicago, a huge issue for the Great Lakes states. Almost every lake that is attached to the Illinois River has Asian carp below the spillway. So that's something that we're worried about, because what happens if we start getting an influx of those Asian carp in our lakes? We've been told they won't reproduce in our lakes, but Asian carp do strange things in the U.S. that they don't do in their homeland, so hopefully we can keep them below the spillway. Fluctuating water levels, nothing we can do with that. We're just going to have to live with that. This is a slide I stole from Jeff, promoting the Friends of Reservoirs. The highlight of the second dot there, habitat loss, water demands, aging reservoirs, declining water quality, sedimentation, shoreline, alteration, urbanization, and invasive species. I have every one of those to deal with on these two lakes. So I really jumped at the opportunity to be involved with the Friends of Reservoirs. So this is where we start with about the Friends of Everbloom. In 2012, our department was approached to be more active in this partnership, the Reservoir Fisheries Habitat Partnership. I went to my division chief, jumped up and down and really wanted to be part of it and promote it in Illinois because I knew how much habitat worked. And our agency doesn't put a lot of funds or effort into habitat, but I can honestly say that since we've been associated with the Reservoir Fisheries Habitat Partnership, that's changing. So that makes me very happy about that. So the first thing I did when I became involved is that I wanted to stack the deck in my favor. I didn't randomly pick a lake or a group of people to start a partnership because I knew if you did something and it didn't work out so well, it's going to be very hard to convince another group to follow in that path. In these two lakes, in Evergreen Lake and Lake Bloomington, there's a pretty good active bass club, and there's other partners that I work with on a regular basis, like those watershed committee people, that I knew that if I could start a partnership on those two lakes, I thought we'd be pretty successful. So the first thing that I did is I went to two local bass guys, Jerry Martolio and Terry Brown. Jerry Martolio is the former president of the Illinois Bass Federation and a fishing guide. And Terry Brown is a jack of all trades, but he's a good promoter. He has the webpage called wiredtofish.com, so he's well tuned to bass anglers and fishing in general. So both of these guys, I went to them and I was like, should we create a new group or should we go to the local bass club or another fishing club and use them as a partnership? And we agreed that if we have the best chance to get something done is to diversify. So we decided to start a new group and call it the Friends of Everbloom, and that way we invite everybody to the table. We don't try to exclude anybody, and I think that approach has worked out very well. The names that are in red are the original people that started the group, and we started Friends of Everbloom in January of 2013, so we're extremely young group, and we're learning and growing as we move along here. So Jerry Martolio is our current president, and like I said before, he's a past president of the Illinois Bass Federation, has good ties to the bass community. Jackie Kraft, our vice president, she is our watershed coordinator for the Soil and Water Conservation District. As I go through this list, you're going to find out that I stacked the deck in my favor for the board as well. Mike Steffa, he's the parks director for the McLean County Parks and Rec, which has a park on Evergreen Lake, so they pretty much run Evergreen Lake. Rick Twait, he is the water purification superintendent on Lake Bloomington, so he's the guy from the city of Bloomington that provides the match money. So another good person to have on your side on the board. And then me. And then Chuck McGuire, he was the School of Business at Illinois State University. He's a retired dean of the College of Business. And I'm like, who better to help us start an organization to get things running than a person who was with the School of Business? Yep, I stacked the deck in my favor to get people that could make decisions, potentially get funding. But then we asked the community to join us. So even though the board is made up of mainly people that are paid to do this, we have a lot of volunteers and also regular people that help us do this as well. This is a quote. I asked some volunteers about these partnerships and what they think that they mean to the volunteer, because I get paid to do this and I have maybe a different concept of what this partnership thing means. I won't read this sentence, but as I said in the beginning, it takes people to come together to make a difference. And to summarize what he's talking about at the very bottom, don't discount the importance of having support and having the public pull the rope in the same direction. So that vegetation project that we've already done on the lake was before the Friends of Everbloom. And I'm going to talk about some projects in a minute that the Friends of Everbloom aren't physically out doing, but the support that the Friends of Everbloom give the city and me is extremely important. So we can go out and do these projects. We have monthly meetings, and then we can go back and talk about these projects, and then we get more support from the public, and it makes it easier to maybe go to the Bloomington City Council and ask for more money to do these projects, because now they have the community buying in to doing these projects. When they were doing those watershed plans, the grant funding required them to do meetings, a public meeting to address the watershed plan. I was told they had like 5 people from the public show up when they were talking about the watershed plan. In our monthly meetings from the Friends of Everbloom, we'll probably get around 40, 45 people to come to every meeting, but we have a lot more members than that. So to go from 5 people to talk about a watershed plan to every monthly meeting to have 40, 45 people is a pretty, I think, a substantial increase and a positive impact. So what are the Friends of Everbloom? What do we do now? We immediately started to grow our own plants because I really believed that was going to make a difference on both of our lakes. So we built our own raceways at Evergreen Lake, and we pot our own plants, grow our own plants. We grow over 400 aquatic plants at Evergreen Lake. We could expand that, but I'm only one person, and that's about as much as that I could probably handle to coordinate to get planted in a year because I have other lakes that I do as well. So I'll probably stick around that 400 plant range and see how that goes. And these are the plants that we're currently growing: sago pondweed, longleaf pondweed, water stargrass, spiderdock, white water lily, and vallisneria. Pretty effective. We are trying to pick plants that tolerate water level fluctuations. I mean, that's one of the huge issues that we have is the water level fluctuations. We did apply for a grant from the Friends of Reservoirs, and we're awarded $1,000 for this habitat project. In 2013, we planted 20 in Evergreen and 20 in Bloomington. That was in 2013. And then this year, our project was actually going to be in Bloomington because it actually, as I mentioned before, needed more vegetation help. But we had another project I'll talk about in a second with a grant as well that was going to do some shoreline stabilization. We needed to drop the lake down. And what I didn't want to do is plant a bunch of vegetation and drop the lake down and kill all my plants. So I switched the project over to Evergreen. So this year we planted 40 enclosures in Evergreen Lake. Those pictures represent plants at Evergreen Lake that were planted in 2013. So we filled in those cages and are growing outside of the cage, and those pictures were this July. So basically a little bit over a growing season, we're already filling up cages and growing outside of the cage. The bottom left is a picture of the same area as the top right corner where we have our vegetation cages at. So that's what we experience is on those water level fluctuations, those flats, get high and dry. But we're pretty successful in the plant selection that we selected to survive that water level fluctuation. We also do artificial habitat, something pretty new for us. We built spider blocks. That's the top right stuff, which is basically a cement block with a bunch of water lines sticking out. And porcupine structures. Maybe we'll try some of the other types of artificial structures in our lake too. Just picked 2 and stuck them on the lake. We're going to try to evaluate and see how well they do to attract fish. One unique thing about building these, in Illinois we actually have high school bass tournaments, which was promoted by Terry Brown. It's an awesome thing. So in the springtime when we have our regional bass tournaments on these lakes, there's alternates that don't do anything during the day while the kids are out fishing. So we actually have them build these fish structures for a project to do during that bass tournament. So I think it's a great way for us to get these structures built and get the kids involved in habitat. We also do river watch. So we have volunteers go out and actually monitor water quality and macroinvertebrates in our feeder streams just to see if any of the projects that we do impact that. There's the big project that we asked for a grant for from the Friends of Reservoirs. It's a $20,000 grant, substantial amount of money for us, especially a brand new partnership. The pictures here aren't the project that we completed. It's actually a project the city of Bloomington funded to see if this concept would work. The concept that we wanted to do was protect shoreline, protecting the toe with riprap, but we wanted to see if we could modify that to increase fish habitat. So we what we call lunker structures. We wanted to put like a hollow cavity underneath that rock and see if the fish would utilize those structures. The original design wasn't to put them all in a row like that, but for logistics of getting them in place, we just stuck them in a row. Since the city Bloomington was funding it, I wasn't going to jump up and down and try to change that. We probably won't use the circle concrete structures for the project on Lake Bloomington. We'll probably go with a precast, more of a square open spot and see if that helps out better. They are backed on the side behind it with a plate. And then the rock is actually placed over on top of that. So the finished project on the top right would actually have riprap on top of those culverts. I did electrofish that shoreline this past Thursday night. I can't say we got a lot of big fish out of it, but the amount of small fish was amazing. All different species coming along that shoreline right off the end of those structures. Probably a combination of both those open cavities and the rock itself. So the project for Bloomington we were hoping to get it done this month. But we actually had a lot of rain in Illinois, and we had high water levels, and we need to do the project from within the lake. So we couldn't do that, so we're going to do it next summer. We're going to protect at least 1,000 feet of shoreline and then add these lunker structures into the project on Lake Bloomington for next summer. And like I mentioned before, this is to reduce the sedimentation and the phosphorus input into the lake and then also add fish habitat. Habitat evaluation, this is somewhat what we're kind of struggling with is how do you evaluate a lot of stuff. I mean, we do shoreline electrofishing, but some of these structures we're going to put in the water are maybe too deep to have electrofishing be effective. Our waters aren't clear enough to use cameras, probably don't have the time or expertise to do scuba diving, so kind of dabbling in the whole side scan sonar. And I saw that was kind of used by other states to do habitat evaluation. This is my first attempt ever to do it was this summer, so it's probably a learning curve here on how to set it and really how to evaluate it. What helped me was actually have GPS pinpoints of where your habitat is, so you know exactly where to go over with that side scan. Seems to help out a lot. We did submit a project that we hope we get funded for next year, and this is for do a streams project. So we're not only focusing on in-lake issues and fish habitat, we're trying to address the watershed issues as well, since we have so much sediment entering from our streams. And so our proposed project to do is to put in rock riffle structure, grade control structures in a stream entering Evergreen Lake. So this tributary represents about 18% of the stream bank erosion above the lake. So that's a pretty significant amount of erosion just from this little feeder stream entering the lake. So if we can protect that, we hopefully can reduce sedimentation and help out our fish population in the lake. And here's a project that was already completed on Evergreen Lake by the city of Bloomington and the McLean County Saltwater Conservation District. The top picture is a rock riffle grade control structure, basically reducing flow rates, dissipating that energy, and holding back water. And we also did some tow protection on the bends there. They also did create a wetland at this point on this site to filter some tile water out. Another thing that they're also doing that we're involved with is trying to put a lot more wetlands in the watershed. 80–85% of the watershed, is agriculture, so we have to figure out a way to filter that water. As I mentioned before, the majority of the watershed is tiled, and so you can see down the bottom left there, if you go along a stream, you just see these pipes sticking out everywhere along the stream. That's the field tile draining all the ag lands. And so when the farmers come in the fall and the spring and apply their ammonia, you get nitrification, and you get nitrates entering directly into those feeder streams going directly to our lake. The only way to filter that out is put in wetlands. So at the bottom right is a completed wetland, just complete, doesn't have any vegetation growth in it, but basically it's meandering the water back and forth, keeping it in there as long as possible, filtering out the nitrates, some sediment deposition as well. Here's some other, in 2013 the city of Bloomington funded a lot of shoreline stabilization projects. So 1,100 feet of shoreline on that project on the left with those lunker structures there. Around the pump house where they pump water from the lake, they did another 1,700 feet of riprap. And then the White Oak boat ramp, they did 400 feet. All of that work was done from the shore with a hi-ho there. But if you wanted to do it in lake, there's several lakes in Illinois where they use the barges on the right for rock deposition. This guy sells these boats, or you can lease these boats, or he'll do the work himself. He's actually a retired Department of Transportation engineer who designed these boats. They're very effective placing rock at the toe of your banks. It's pretty impressive how fast they can work and how effective it is. If you need to get it to a shoreline where you can't get equipment on the shore, this is the most cost-effective way to do that shoreline. And as you can see, if you have a boat ramp, he can put a boat on it. And he actually has, has big boats that have automated hoppers on it. So you just load that hopper full of rock, and there's a conveyor system that dumps the rock off the front end. He actually has smaller boats as well. So if you have even a smaller lake, you can put a much smaller boat on that. It's not automated, but still is the same concept. We try to promote the lake. We try to get a diverse user group. So this fall, we tried to have a Lake Fest Day just to promote the lake itself, things that happen around the lake, and our project. So we just wanted to get people out to the lake and say, here's your drinking water lake. Here's a place to recreate. Here's the things that we're doing to help out the lake. I think it went over very well for our first year. We had a fishing tournament. We gave pontoon rides and talked about water quality, which that was probably the most popular thing. Built bat houses. Never thought that'd be popular, but we had pre-made all these boards for kids to come in and build bat houses. They got rid of every one of those. That was pretty cool. And then we had a 5K. There's a lot of people that use the trails and the roads around the lakes for biking and riding. Another way to get a diverse group of people involve the Friends of Everbloom to join us. Pretty excited about this. We were pretty pleased that we were nominated to be on this list. It definitely helped us promote this in Illinois. I was pretty excited when that happened. And hopefully we can be good representatives of the Reservoir Fisheries Habitat Partnership and the Friends of Reservoirs. It's definitely helped me out tremendously. It gives me an avenue to go talk to people about habitat. Before that, I always struggled with how do you get people to come together, and now I have a purpose. I can go to a meeting and say, here's our purpose, get behind me and we'll move forward. Prairie Island Anglers is another group. I just have a couple of slides about them. Much smaller group. There was an existing club that's been around 20, 30 years at City of Bloomington. And so I work on a small little lake right next to the City of Bloomington, 150-acre state-owned lake. We don't have a lot of big issues there, so I didn't feel we needed this big, diverse group to tackle those projects. And the Prairie Island Anglers were a good group of guys that always wanted to help out. So I just went to them and was like, would you be willing to basically adopt Dawson Lake as your home lake and help me with projects? And they were pretty excited about it. They kind of gave their club a focus as well, kind of rejuvenated their spirit on doing stuff. So it was a win-win for both of us. We put in habitat stuff, Christmas trees, porcupine structures, spider box, pallets. The one issue I have actually with this group is only 150-acre lake. They want to fill the lake pretty much with fish habitat year-round. So every time I kind of go to the lake, they have more stuff stockpiled for the next habitat. So I kind of got to slow them down a little bit and say, we kind of got to evaluate some of the stuff because I just don't want to dump a bunch of stuff in there and it doesn't work. But they're an awesome group. They put in fishery line recycling containers around the lake, and they actually went around all the urban lakes in Bloomington Normal and put them in there. And it's amazing how well they get used. I didn't think they get used that well, but they get used a lot. Then I think it's Berkeley. They turn the line into Berkeley and you get fish habitat back. So they go to all those lakes and do that. They also partner with high school bass fishing tournaments on the lake. They help run those tournaments. They monitor the water quality on Dawson Lake. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency has a volunteer monitoring program where we can monitor water quality, and so they do water quality monitoring throughout the summer. So a really good group of individuals. They do kids fishing. I turned one of my rearing ponds into a kids fishing pond, and so they help with that.